Hello, this is Mark Sabatella from Outside Shore Music. In this video, I want to talk about editorial decisions, so the sorts of things an editor might do with a composer's work. And these tend to be things like adding articulations, maybe clarifying some tempo or dynamics here and there, adding fingering if this is a piano piece or guitar piece especially. These are the sorts of things, maybe bowing for violin. This is typically done by an editor. The composer's original manuscript is normally not so busy with that kind of work, that kind of markings, at least until relatively recently in history. An exception is, a partial exception, I should say, is Muzio Clementi, who had a very clear vision of his works as pedagogical. In other words, he really wanted them to be used for teaching, and so he did put some attention to some editorial decisions that other people might not, but in particular, he really cared about fingering. So if you look, this is the original, the first edition of his sonatinas, and it says composed and fingered by Clementi. And if we go ahead and look at this, the first edition, it does indeed have fingering markings. They're these old school ones that I just learned about myself, where the plus indicates thumb. The one there actually is the index finger. So you'll see it's fingered, fingering markings pretty heavily throughout, but there's nothing else for articulations, right? There's no slurs, there's no staccatos, and so forth. He then did a series of revisions of this. This is the sixth edition with considerable improvements by the author. And if we look at it at first glance, it's also got a bunch of fingerings. The main difference here is where these fingerings are. It's the exact same fingerings, 131 plus plus, which is the same as it was in the other version, 131 plus plus, except he's just moved it from above to below the staff. So these are also kinds of decisions an editor might make. Still, though, no actual articulations. I did notice one curious revision he made that I don't know when he made it, but apparently it didn't really stick. But check this out. In the development section here, the original version has right here, right, that passage there. If we look at the sixth edition, check out that exact same passage here. Then we've got this octave marking. Well, that's kind of cool. I don't know. I think he experimented with that idea. He liked it, but for some reason it didn't really survive. The modern editions of this do not have the octave marking, and they don't have that pretty cool F sharp in there. That's a nice little line in there. In any case, that's a little decision he made there. The other modern editions, like here's the one that I think I learned it from. This is the Schirmer edition. We'll see that, okay, when we take a look at that one passage, there's no octave marking, there's no F sharp, right? It's got fingering markings, not actually as many as Clementi had in there, but it does have articulations, right? It's got the slurs, it's got the staccato markings, and so forth. Another edition, though, that I'm looking at has different articulations. Check it out. If I take this literally in the Schirmer edition, it's right. So it's slurred note, slur, staccato, staccato, slur, staccato, staccato. But the other edition is just right, there's no staccatos, but there is a slur just on the eighth notes, and I'm kind of exaggerating things a little bit to make the effect. I have a love-hate relationship with articulation markings. I mean, articulations, I love. I love the idea that you can play some notes long, some notes short. I think the improviser in me doesn't like to be told which ones to play long and short. I feel like that's part of my job as an interpreter of music, is to make these decisions. And I feel like Clementi is on my side in this, because he's not putting any of that stuff in there. He's like saying, no, students, you figure that out for yourselves. Either that, or he just didn't think the students were capable of that kind of decision, and didn't, or capable of making the articulations. Can't really be sure. But in any case, we see that there's several different valid ways that this score, the same exact piece of music, could possibly be marked up, and these are all the sorts of things that are within the realm of what an editor does. There's just one last thing I want to point out about the articulations. I really think that these are, partially because this is how I originally learned the piece, the articulations in here make a lot of sense to me, but there's some interesting things that I want to point out. That articulations on the piano are kind of phrase markings, or the slurs in particular. They don't necessarily tell you, like on a wind instrument, it tells you about tonguing versus slurring, or on a violin, it tells you about the direction of your bow. On piano, it's more just general, these notes kind of go together, is really what it means. And I like that idea, and I like the idea that, generally speaking, that should carry you into the end of the phrase. So we see phrases like this guy right here. It takes me all the way into the G. And then the next phrase starts with that G, right? So that phrase takes me into the G. And I like that this editor has chosen to do that fairly often with his phrases, carrying it across the bar line, and then perhaps even starting another phrase on that same note, if it makes sense to. There's a couple places where he doesn't, but that's places like here. There's like the phrase ends at the end of the measure, it doesn't carry into beat one, but I think that is because there's a big leap down, and I think that's what he's going for there. There's also a place here where he doesn't carry it across, and it's because the note repeats. The E repeats there, so he kind of feels like he needs to start a new phrase there rather than carry it across the bar line. These are all the sorts of decisions, again, that for me as a pianist, I like to just make those decisions myself. I've been guilty of just ignoring the articulation markings I might see in a published score and just doing what I think makes sense. In any case, I wanted to give you some sense of what these decisions are by looking at some actual examples and looking at the differences there, and talking about what the composer's intent might be, and even the changes the composer himself made from one version to another. So in any case, those are some of the things that an editor might do.